Chapter 4, Thanksgiving in Tempe, which might as well be called Third Eye coming into play. So I left Brooklyn after getting my marching orders from Oshun. I was moving quickly. Within 8 weeks, I was completely packed and flew to my grandfather's place in Arizona. Still, I was feeling apprehensive. I felt I was going to an ending. I felt that I was going to a funeral. Like I promised him, I got there right before Thanksgiving. When I arrived in Tempe, Arizona, I arrived on Monday, November 16th, 2015. On my way there was a growing sense of dread that I was feeling because my grandfather had kind of hinted that he'd like to have a family member near him when he was going to make his transition. Once I got to my grandfather's house, I started having some very strange dreams. I would go to bed at night and I would hear like a kind of a music. In the beginning, I didn't know what the heck was happening, and I was waking up sort of like trying to shake it off, It's kind of like when you're having a bad dream, or you're having a dream you don't like, and you think, well, I'll just wake up, and then I can move on to something else. But the thing is that every time I would wake up and then I would go back to sleep, it would just pick up, where it left off. I would hear like a voice or voices, but voices singing in a pitch and sort of speaking in a kind of a language that I'd never heard before. It sounded like it was coming from some other kind of realm. The only music that came close was David Bowie's Black Star. One dream vision was extraordinary. I saw a face appear in water. In triptych, the face of a woman began singing. At the conclusion of her singing, ribbons of India ink appeared in the water. It was beautiful and mystifying. Dum, 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 dum. Dum, 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 dum. Da, da, dum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Ba-dum, bum, bum. Mm-hmm. 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 The vision stopped and I awoke. The humming is from my cell phone recording of me trying to capture what I heard once I awoke. But it's far off the mark. My human body just can't reproduce those sounds. But these dreams had been so relentless, I realized they were messages that I might understand later. So I better save them. This is my sketch. It gives a bit of a more accurate vision of what I saw. And then the Christmas holidays rolled around. I got us a big tree with the help of my friend Morel. The night before our last day together, My grandfather had gone to the theater to see a production of Black Nativity. And when he came home, it was pretty late. We sat down and we started talking. He kind of shared some family secrets with me. I guess things that he thought that I should know, or things he just wanted to get off his chest. And then, before you know it, it was midnight. And I said, "Hey, Grandpa, it's really late. Shouldn't you be in bed?" And he said, "Oh my God, yes." And he just got up and walked down the hallway, closed the door, bop, and went to bed. That was Grandpa. He didn't waste any time. The next morning, everything seemed all right, except when I got up, Grandpa was not in the living room. Usually he would be in the living room at that point, drinking tea. He'd either be watching, a television program, or he'd be reading. Grandpa wasn't in his chair. So I was a little worried about him. Already that feeling of anxiety had started bubbling up from, the day before, because I could tell that there was a change coming. With the loss of his daughter, a lot of the joy, or sort of the reason for living, had gone out of his life. They were very, very close. So it was a big blow for him. For any parent that loses a child prematurely, it's very difficult to understand why that happens. And now on to our last day together. I went to his bedroom door and I kind of knocked on the door, and I was like, "Grandpa, are you all right?" I kind of cracked open the door, a little afraid actually. And there he was under the covers, and he said, "Oh, I'm all right. I'm just a little tired." And I said, Yeah, it was really late for you last night. I mean, midnight for you is like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning for somebody else." Guests expected. There were some friends of his that were going to be coming by later on. They were supposed to come by at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I decided, I'm just going to let him rest, and I'll get him up at around 11 o'clock or so he has enough time to get changed and get himself together to prepare for his guests. 11 o'clock came along, and I knocked on the door, and I said, "Hey, Grandpa, remember, your friend so-and-so and so-and-so are coming by today at 1, And he's like, "Oh, yes, yes." So he got up. Actually, he was already dressed. He was just there, doing his cufflinks by the time I had opened the door again. And I said, "Oh, do you need to take a shower?" "Oh, no. I already did that. I did that earlier this morning." I said, "Okay." He came out to the kitchen and decided he needed to drink a cup of green tea to sort of wake himself up, because he was feeling a little, sleepy from his late night. And we sat there at the kitchen table, Grandpa slurping his green tea and me typing something on the computer as usual. And eventually they did arrive, and my grandfather, being the host, them, and was very sociable and had wanted, a certain item. He had that ready for them, but I could tell that he wasn't quite himself. So I let it be known that we might have to cut the visit a little bit short. The woman's mother got the hint, being old school, said, don't worry, darling, don't worry, baby, we'll be leaving soon," to my relief. And they did leave. More guests? Half an hour later, just when I thought everything was settled, there's another knock on the door. It's another couple of my grandfather's friends. They were concerned because he'd had a little health scare a couple of days before, and they wanted to come check on him. My grandfather's blood pressure had spiked on the Wednesday, and so he spent a night in the hospital just to make sure everything was okay. They were concerned and worried about that, because my grandfather really never had health scares. He was like the model of health. He was healthier than people half his age, or even 2/3 his age. But again, I asked them to leave a little bit early, because I felt that, this couldn't turn into like a 2-hour visit. And it's a good thing that I did, because what happened next was dramatic. He had this faraway look in his eyes, and he was confusing the remote for the telephone. He looked happy, like he was seeing something or someone. He also looked like he was slipping away. But where? I could tell there was a big change coming. That's something I've indicated earlier in this video. After the last set of guests left, I got up and I left Grandpa sitting in his chair in the living room, and I went to my bedroom to continue working on a project that I was trying to finish up on the computer. And after a few moments, I heard my grandfather clearing his throat. I thought he was coughing at first. But after a few moments, my ears just pricked up and I realized that something else was going on. So I got up quickly and I went into the living room and I found him sitting in his chair, bolt upright, with his fists clenched, a fist on each thigh, with his head dropped down to his chest. You know, his chin was resting on his chest, and he was making a gurgling noise. He was bracing himself, and as I scanned him up and down quickly, I realized that my grandfather was having a heart attack. My intellect understood that, and my emotions were all over the place. I did what you could only do in a situation like that, and I called 911 immediately. So when I got 911 on the phone and I explained the situation, the operator talked me through what I was supposed to do. She instructed me to pick my grandfather up out of the chair and lay him on the floor. And then once I had him on the floor, to perform CPR on him. Her suggestion was that I take 2 hands and do a pressurized motion on his heart area in hopes that it would keep his heart going. She told me to just keep doing that and that there was an ambulance on the way. And so I complied with that. I want to share something with you now that is extremely rare and special. So, I have my grandfather on the floor and I am pushing, doing the CPR. And while I'm doing that, I hear a breath, like a sigh, go out of his body. And I see with my own 2 eyes a very small vaporized sac leave his body. It left from his heart area and it flew over to the right. That triangular shape is my attempt to show you what that vapor-like sac that departed his body looked like. It was very, 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 very small. It couldn't have been more than a quarter of an inch at most. I mean, just a few centimeters. And when that happened, I looked and I said out loud, "Just like they say." Just like they say. Like who says? Wise men? I could understand that my grandfather's soul had left his body, encased in what we call prana, taking the prana with it, which is the life energy, and also it was encased in subtle elements, the mind, and the ego, or the false ego. I was amazed that I was able to see that. This is something that I had read about, this is something that I had wondered about, but it's not something that I actually ever thought that I would perceive with my own two eyes. And as I looked back down, at his body, I could see the light go out of his eyes, and he was gone. It seemed like just moments later, the ambulance and the firefighters were at my door. They got on the floor and they got all their, instruments and their electrodes, all those tools of the trade they do to try and shock someone's heart back into working again. But he was already gone. It was one of the most bizarre and disconnected situations that I've ever been in. I mean, knowing that the soul had already left the body, the thing that keeps life within the body, while seeing all these well-meaning people standing around, desperately trying to get my grandfather's heart to start again when the energy had already left. This is why my grandfather wanted me to come out and live with him. And thanks to the push of my mother spiritually, I had arrived in just the nick of time. You've been listening to Third Eye from my album Yoga on the Dance Floor. Thank you for watching Akayane Music.